So yeah, we are on week 5 of a 6-week study, which is just amazing. It feels like we've, in a way it's gone fast and in a way it's gone really slow, right? So time has a whole new conceptual feeling now. But today we are going to talk about the topic of God, seeing God in everything, and nature and springtime. It will certainly kind of be a theme for us today. And when I was laying out the class, I just kind of wanted this day to follow the Dark Night of the Soul day, but I didn't realize it would fall on Earth Day week. So that was pretty cool random timing that yesterday was Earth Day. And some of you that were on the call early this morning heard us talking about my squirrel story. So I put it on Facebook, on my Facebook page, but I made a video because I've been living with this family of squirrels in quarantine in our porch roof, and they're right outside. In fact, I'm like looking right over my computer at where the action was. So it was a fun distraction. But I think that the squirrel, I've got tons of sermon material with the squirrels, because what we realized, there was a squirrel family up there. We patched the hole that they had entered through. Then we took down a can light on the porch so that, because I could still hear that there was activity up there. And so they could come out, but then we realized they wouldn't jump. And so we put a ladder and then a stick and then tree branches. I've been in this rescue effort because I realized when we patched the hole, apparently the mother squirrel was outside of the nest and the babies were still in the porch. And so pretty quickly you could see that there's a 5-minute video documenting my nature documentary. But so I watched this mother basically rescue her babies, her teenagers. And I'll show you. Then so the story, as the story goes, there were 4 babies, I think, and one took days to come down, and finally came down yesterday. And I kind of had written that one off thinking, oh, it's not going to make it. I would see its head peer down, but it never found the courage to climb down. And the mother would return and teach it and try to teach it. And the baby just couldn't do it. And then yesterday it finally did it. And that's the triumphant end of my video. But then this morning when I came into my office, this was, let's see, where is it? Oh, Zoom's doing something funky. Maybe I can't share screen today. Uh-oh. Okay. So, oh, wait, maybe, let me try that again. Maybe I have to be, no? I don't know. Maybe you're not going to see the picture right now of the sweet little baby squirrel. Let's see. I updated my operating system. I bet that's part of it. Yep. I have to set it all up. Okay, so we won't do slides. I'll put them on at the end. But when I came into my office this morning, that baby squirrel was on the porch, like, and he's so cute. And I think he was saying thank you. So that's my imagination. But he came back and he has this like dark mouth, so I could identify him. And that was him. So anyway, I think that what it reminds me of is God is in everything. And the way that these squirrels were created, clearly hardwired for love, because this mother kept coming back. You know, and so it was about 8 days. And I really thought she would have given up on them, but she kept returning. So that just told me there was this innate love and care within her. And then the reunion, you can see it on the video. I'll put it on the class webpage if you're not on Facebook. On the video, the mother loves on her baby, and it's so clear that that's what's happening. And so that's pretty amazing. And it paralleled faith for me. It paralleled God's love for us. It paralleled God waiting on us and trying to show us the way. And sometimes we go that direction, and sometimes we don't have the courage to go that direction. So you may be hearing sermons for the next year from me about squirrels. But I think that, you know, I invite you to watch that video and just kind of place your own meaning on it and see what comes to you. Somebody on Facebook already saw a recovery metaphor in there of how, you know, I was trying to help, but the squirrel had to do it on its own. And that's a pretty powerful message too, of we can love and we can hope for the best, but it came down to that squirrel figuring it out on its own. So there's a lot of cool metaphors in nature for our relationship with God. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So in case you're joining us for the first time, because I know the class continues to grow, I'm just going to kind of give us a quick review. And for those of us that have been in the study for 5 weeks, this will help solidify our learning. But we are looking mainly at the spiritual practice of contemplation, which is this idea of prayer without words. So rather than kind of our traditional formats for prayer, we are going to God in silence, and we are sitting and listening and just trying to feel God's presence rather than telling God what we want or what we wish for to happen or how we think the world should work. We're really just kind of opening our hearts and minds to being present with God, and especially in the presence of love, and allowing ourselves to just kind of seep in the love of God, if you will. So that's what contemplation is. And the teachers of contemplation through history were called Christian mystics. And Christian mystics, I think we'll study like 8 of them. There are many more. I picked kind of the 8 most popular or most applicable to worry, which was kind of the topic of the study of transcending out of worry. And so I chose the mystics that we read this time based on their writings, specifically on worry and finding God to transcend our worry. But we started with Thomas Merton and Richard Rohr, who I'm sure many of you have seen quoted or follow their work. They're more contemporary modern mystics. Richard Rohr has an excellent daily email of a daily meditation that he sends out, or other Cynthia Bourgeault, who you also read, other people write with him. He in New Mexico has the Center for Action and Contemplation, and they do amazing work, and his daily emails are profound. But the mystics were people that teach of a personal relationship with God. And so in looking back, Jesus was really kind of the first mystic, and Jesus never called himself that. But we can see that his relationship with God was one of contemplation, of removing himself to be silent with God, to kind of align himself with God's will rather than my will. He had visions of God. We see God appear to Jesus in the Transfiguration, in the voice at his baptism. We see Jesus certainly surrender, which is not giving up, but it is going to God. It is inviting God into our pain and our suffering. And then Jesus really modeled this full union with the divine, fully recognizing God within and living, as we call it now, the light of Christ within. So this is what the Christian mystics were. They were a people that have been kind of put into a category, but they really just sought deep spiritual experiences. And most of them were deeply religious. Many were monks and nuns and spiritual directors within the Catholic Church at the time. But they weren't kind of in line with the teachings of the medieval Catholic Church. So in sermons, God was being presented as a wrathful, judging God, and humans were being presented as very broken, very sinful, very tempted. And the mystics kind of saw it a different way. They saw a God of love. They quote the book of John, the Gospel of John, a lot. So the Gospel of John kind of reads as a more mystical gospel than the other 3, which are more historical telling of Jesus's life. John kind of puts a little more meaning into who was God and what was Jesus modeling to us about God. So it reads a little, and some people kind of read John and say, it's out there. Like, I'm not sure I understand that. Now I think if you go back after this class and read John, you're going to find a whole lot more meaning in it than you ever have before. It was cool for me because I would say John was my least favorite gospel. And now I get it. I'm growing to like it. Because now I kind of see where he was more mystical in his thinking, which is more the mystery of God and the experience of God. Remember, the mystics were moving from their head into their heart with God, or moving God from your head to your heart. So then last week we looked at the dark night of the soul and how hard it is to surrender, and how hard it is to feel abandoned or wonder where God is in a crisis. And that's kind of where we are as a human species right now. We're in the largest global pandemic in human history. And so this is all new territory for all of us. And as people of faith, we are looking at, our prayer life and how is this happening? And if God is sovereign and can fix everything and heal instantly, then why don't we see that happening? And so we're all kind of in our own little faith wrestling. But I think what the mystics are teaching us in this 6 weeks is that you will continue to wrestle. And that doesn't mean that you have little faith. That actually means you have a deeper sense of faith, because you're trying to find God in the tough stuff. And that you have a faith that you don't just talk about, but you're actually living and you're actually in it. And so I think that I hope you're getting kind of messages of validation and affirmation as you read the mystics, because I feel like they're saying, I'm in it with you. I lived 1,000 years ago, but I get your struggle and I get your questions, and I want to help you. But we also know this relationship doesn't come easily, because we are humans with really busy minds, and our minds are racing all the time. And we're naturally worried because, remember, we talked about this the first week, our brain is created to keep us safe. So it will always worry, because it's its job, our amygdala's job is to be watching out for danger, to keep us safe and for our survival. So that amygdala center part of your brain, neuroscience calls it the reptile brain. And I think about that when I see a lizard in the woodpile of like, is it safe? Can I go? Can I go? That darting brain, we share that with the lizard. And that's the amygdala just saying, are you safe or not safe? And so of course you're going to worry. You are going to worry every day as a human being, because that's part of how you're made, and it's the beautiful thing, part of you that keeps you safe. But we also recognize as people of faith that it can separate from us from God if we allow the worry to consume us, and if we forget to sit in the quiet with God, and if we forget to surrender. So part of this work that we're doing, why we take Bible studies and why we have these conversations, is because we're working to train our brain that becomes more of our normal. So of course we're going to worry, but instead of going down the path of the abyss and hopelessness, we say, yeah, I'm worried. I'm going to pray about this. I'm going to go for a walk and talk to God about this. I'm going to call a like-minded friend and see what she has to say. So we are going to worry, but we also know we have resources to help get our brains back to where I think God would have them be, which is peace and love and gentleness and kindness and a calm serenity. So this is kind of where we've been. Some of your emails speak of the love of Julian of Norwich. So if you haven't read her, go back. She would be in week 2 of your class materials. So that date would have been April 9th. And she's one of my favorites too. So I love that she's resonating with you. A couple of her quotes are, nothing less than God can satisfy us. Nothing less than God can satisfy us. And I think that really kind of gets at some of the lessons we're learning with simplicity and slowing down, and how we were chasing happiness. And now that we are kind of more still, maybe we're reevaluating what satisfies us and how we want to live our lives. So she wrote in the 1100s and was already thinking about these things. And then her quote, all shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. I think we could have that one on repeat to our sweet little brains right now, because we're worried and we're wondering if all will be well. And then we moved on from Julian of Norwich into the Cloud of Knowing, and that's a tough one. I think that's probably one of the hardest readings that we will do in this class. It's one that I go back to and find it easier to read the more I go back to it. It's a heady one. But what the gist of the Cloud of Knowing, you really don't have to struggle to read it. The point is that the spiritual director who wrote that letter, kind of to his directee, but to all of us today, is the message is forget everything you know about God. Just sit with God and let go of the fight of trying to understand God and figure it out and be right. And like, am I right about God? The Cloud of Unknowing says, drop all that and just experience God. There is no right or wrong. It's just an experience with God, and whatever you feel is the right answer. So it's really a permission slip. That's kind of how I'm reading it today, is a permission slip to just be, that you don't have to work so hard at trying to figure out your faith, just to allow it to happen. However, in the United States, we struggle to allow anything to happen, and we spend a lot of time trying to figure stuff out. We love intellect in the United States, and we love academic challenges, and we love disciple Bible studies, and we just dig in, and that's what we do. And so this class is really about learning to sit in the still and the quiet and not work so hard at it. So think about that in your own life, of just kind of letting go of that effort and just experience it instead. And then we read about the work of Augustine. We read Augustine, who was in the 500s, which we laughed that that's when toilet paper was invented, because when we started this class, we were in a major toilet paper shortage. And I think everybody's so stocked up for now that we never may buy toilet paper again. But Augustine lived in a time, and I wanted you to just think about what civilization was like when he was writing, because it would have been a time where, life was a struggle. And so he was trying to kind of find God in the struggle of how hard life was. That same week, we read Cynthia of Bourgeault, who's a contemporary. She's alive today, and I know many of you love her work. But that kind of contrasted 1,500 years on the spectrum of people still struggling with the same things. And my intention in giving you those two readings together was to show you that don't feel like we're ever going to figure it all out, because this is just part of being human. This is part of our human journey, is to seek God and to grow closer to God, but it's not something we ever master. And so when we compare ourselves to the mystics or to clergy or to people that you think have it all figured out, they're struggling just as much as you are to wrestle with these big questions. And Augustine was one of the first people that really kind of got at this idea of training your brain, that spiritual practices, he called them spiritual disciplines, were really about kind of training your brain to be still. And, I look at the study in neuroscience of neuroplasticity today. Augustine was really hinting at that research that we're now being able to prove. But the idea of neuroplasticity is that your brain can be rewired, that repeatedly thinking the same thought hardwires a neural connection in your brain. And so if you're worrying all the time, and if you are telling yourself you're doomed all the time, then that becomes a neural pathway in your brain, and you really believe that you're doomed. Your brain has hardwired that, if you will. But the study of neuroplasticity says at any given time, we can rewire our brains. And so repeatedly thinking a positive thought will literally reprogram your brain. And neuroscience has proven this now. And that area of research gives me such hope, because nothing is final, right? It's the resurrection Easter story. Everything can start again. Everything can have new life, including your thought patterns and your brain. So really what Augustine was getting at, in all of the mystics, is we have to train our brain to be quiet and to allow ourselves to feel the presence of God, that it's a human exercise. It doesn't come naturally to us, is what Augustine was getting at. So that's pretty cool that that was happening in the 500s. And now we're finding science to kind of prove it to, again, our intellectual brains like proof. And neuroplasticity is finding evidence. And I even think in my own life, I can really see when I react to something that used to cause me panic or anger or upset, I can just kind of observe myself now not reacting like I used to. And I think my brain is slowly getting this new message of inner peace and calm. We looked at the work of Jack Kornfield. I told you the story about the heavy boulder that Jack told when he was a monk. And the summary of that is that the priest points to a boulder and says, "Is it heavy?" And the monks say yes. And he said, "Only if you pick it up." And I know that resonated with all of us with worry right now, of catching ourselves when we pick up that boulder and carry it around all day. And no wonder we're exhausted and spent at the end of the day and snapping at the people we love, because we've been carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, feeling very responsible for everybody's happiness. That's picking up the boulder. So I know you have continued to work with introspection on that one. And I think what the mystics would say is, if you continue to pick up that heavy boulder, you're separating yourself from God over time, right? You are starting to think that you're in control, and you are starting to think that you have to figure it out on your own. And when we get in that mindset, we begin to get our will confused with God's will, and that causes us to start to drift away. So I think the mystics warn us of that happening if we're not careful. And as Michelle said earlier, we talked about putting stuff on the altar, and that we walk away altered, right, with an E instead of an A. So altar with an A, and then altered with an E. And that idea that the altar can be your front porch, it can be under a tree, it can be on the beach, it can be with a cup of tea and your favorite book, right? That's meeting God in a space is what the altar is all about. So it's an encounter you have with God. It's not about where it occurs. But the idea of an altar in a church is usually a table where the sacraments occur, where our encounters with God occur. And so in our own lives with worry, we can imagine this imagery of putting our worry on the altar and surrendering it. And then we come away transformed anytime we surrender. So the welcoming prayer was one of the practices that we have been working with. Centering prayer, welcoming prayer, a heart breathing prayer. All of those are still out there. Go back if you haven't had a chance. And if the readings aren't resonating with you, that's absolutely fine. There's little YouTube videos to give you a taste of this stuff if reading isn't your thing. And then the practices are handouts with instructions. I really invite you to continue to play with those practices. Then last week we talked about John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul. And this is really about when we are in despair and when we are feeling abandoned by God, which is a very human emotion. The Psalms are full of this. You read Lamentations, which we don't hear about very often, but it's a very human poem of despair after Jerusalem is in ruins. That John of the Cross looked at that despair as an opportunity to grow closer to God, to get a deeper relationship than ever with God. And I think that some of us are really experiencing that in this time of quarantine. And I love your stories of feeling God's presence in a new way because we've slowed down. Our pace is different. I think that's one of the biggest blessings that could come out of this scary time. But John of the Cross was trying to reform the Christian church at the time in the 1500s. And he was trying to get back to the teachings of Jesus because he felt that the church had become too institutional. And he was put in prison for that. And when he was in prison is when he finally really felt the presence of God, but he'd been a priest his whole life. And that's not to be like, oh my gosh, it took him that long. That's not to weigh on your hearts as like, I may never find God if a priest didn't even find God. That's more to say, he's teaching us not to wait for a prison dark experience, to find God now in the everyday, and that you don't have to be knocked down to your knees in a dark night of the soul to to accept God's love. That's what I think his message to us today is. So then we did also Teresa of Avila, and this is now we're all caught up. So she was a wild youth, and her father put her in a convent as a punishment. And then she ended up loving the convent because it meant she didn't have to get married and have children, which was the only other option at the time in the 1500s. So I love her spirit. And Teresa of Avila reminds me of a lot of us today as women in the United States really finding our voices. I think she's a great role model for that. And she kind of said what she thought, which didn't always make the patriarchy happy. But what she says to us is a similar message of John of the Cross, which is you could get this now. You don't have to wait. She says she waited 20 years of spiritual study before she encountered that heartwarming experience with God. And her writings are passionate about, you can figure this out before I did. And so I think she leaves that to us. But she says, if you have God, you will want for nothing. So that's that same kind of theme that we heard from Julianne of Norwich in Nothing Less Than God Can Satisfy Us, right? We're starting to see some of these same themes as you get more familiar with the mystics. And then one of them that I love that I want to introduce you to in case you missed it in the readings is, this is her quote, "Let nothing disturb the silence of this moment with you, O Lord. Let nothing disturb the silence of this moment with you, O Lord." And I think we could each pray that in our own way, but for me it is, let my worried thoughts not steal my time with you, God, or disturb my silence with you, God. So put that into your own words, and I'll post all of this, but let nothing disturb the silence of this moment with you, oh God. And we looked at her bookmark. That was one of the handouts. And Rhonda Zillner gets Richard Rohr's daily emails. And I have mine going into a folder. And so I'm behind on reading them. And I'm so glad that Rhonda sent me on Friday morning after we talked on Thursday, Richard wrote on Teresa's bookmark, which was so cool. So I'll post that also, and you can see what he had to say about it. But that bookmark you can cut out and make your own bookmark, or do a creative project while you're feeling crafty in quarantine. And it's a beautiful prayer, and that was literally her bookmark. So that brings us to one of her quotes that is our theme for today. Teresa said, "Learn to see God in the details of your life, for he is everywhere." And that's what we're talking about. So in the chat, I would love for you to, and I'm going to catch up on some of these chat posts. Post in the chat a word or a phrase that describes how you see God in the details of life. So Teresa's quote was, "Learn to see God in the details of your life, for he is everywhere." And I think that what she's saying is see God in the ordinary. And I think all of us, I struggle with this. I read the mystics and sometimes think, oh my gosh, they had these extraordinary moments with God. And I don't feel like I get those, right? Or they had these extraordinary lives and something major happened to them. And that's why they felt the presence of God. But I think the majority of their writings is that God is in the ordinary, not just the extraordinary. And Teresa says, God is among the pots and the pans, right? That's one of her quotes that I love of just see God in everything. See God in washing the dishes. There's Benedict, Saint Benedict has a writing on scrubbing floors is where he most felt the presence of God and humbling himself in that way. Okay, so let's see what you guys are coming up with. Small acts of kindness in other people. Yeah, running. Oh, I love that. Oh, Brooke, I love, yes, the Japanese pottery. Oh my gosh, that's such a good metaphor. Yeah. And the laughter of children, absolutely. Garden and take a walk. Oh, Karen, you're going to love this week's practices. Nature, smiling of children playing. Dogs, yes. Gosh, dogs are such soulful reminders of God's love. Walks, connecting with friends. Mountains, yeah, Colors of the sunset. Oh, spring buds. Yeah, the red buds in Kansas City are so amazing right now. The inside of a flower. Yeah. Birds singing. Oh my gosh. You guys are modern mystics. Francis of Assisi and Bernard of Clairvaux is who we're going to study this week. And you guys, they're going to be right up your alley. The birth of babies. Wow. Yeah. Miracles. Yeah. Paddle boarding. That's awesome. I've never done that. Details of nature. Yep. An eagle flying. Yeah. 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 That's beautiful. Oh, awesome. Oh my gosh, how the world has slowed down. Breath. Yep. Mm, totally. Oh, I love all that. Michelle, I see your note about screen share. What do we need to do?
Okay, so if you'll go to the participant panel, or you could, do you see me, Ginger? Sorry,
Yes,
we need a little technical
I see you.
change. Okay, you can click my 3 dots,
Yes.
go down and make me host again.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you do that? And then I
Yes.
can, okay, thank you. All set.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. It still may be a problem on my end because of updating last night.
Okay.
To share my squirrel video, I had to do a whole new upgrade of all the operating systems. Great. Because I do want to try to share a slide with you. So this poem, oh, Michelle, this says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, I'll try this again. Sorry, everybody.
That's okay. I'll post it on the webpage if we don't.
All right, you might be able to try it now.
Let me try one more time. I think it's going to be a problem on my end, it looks like. Let me see if I can, I think Zoom needs permission. Okay, let me see if I can do it now. Okay, now it's gonna work. Here we go. Okay, there's my squirrel friend. So this is the last baby to come out. See, he's so sweet, he's so little. And then that's where he was this morning when I came back to the window. So thank you, Sing, thank you. Okay, so here's a poem by Barbara Brown Taylor. I'll read it to you so you can read along with me, but it really gets at what you just shared in the chat. And Barbara Brown Taylor was the author you read last week on Walking in the Dark. So this land that gives us our food, our water, these trees that clean the air for us to breathe, all these green and growing things that bless our bodies with their beauty, these are not resources. They are fellow creatures with their own rights and responsibilities before God. They have their own sacred duties to perform, if only we will let them. Yeah, so you'll have that in your materials this week, and I hope you'll consider, maybe rewriting that or writing your own version of that poem, but it's really powerful. These are not resources to us. Everything has its sacred contribution. Everything is holy, and it's up to us to see that. And I am asking you to reread Genesis 1 this week, which I know you know it in your head, but I want you to read it again and let it move into your heart and read it more as poetry. That's how it's thought that it was first intended, is the poem of how God created the world, and not necessarily, a scientific, accurate depiction of how things came to be, but more how we might imagine God being in all of creation. That's how I want you to look at Genesis this week. You're also going to have a practice of taking a walk with Jesus in nature. And you guys are going to love this because you really got to this in your comments. I'm looking down at what I've missed. The lake. Yes, God and dog. I'll share that, Brooke. That's a great YouTube video. the God is dog spelled backwards. I'll share that. And yes, nature's being restored, Susan. We're going to talk about that this morning too. I've got some pictures for you. Okay, my squirrel is back in my window. Watching squirrels. The Oh, wow, Mary, the warm vibration I experience when I see God at work. Oh, that's such an embodied reaction to God at work. I love that. Brother Lawrence peeling potatoes. That's right. Very good. Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. A cup of coffee with a friend. Oh, yes. I can't wait till we could do that in person again. I want you this week to imagine that Jesus is on your walk with you. And if you're not able to get out and walk, then sit by a window and really use your imagination and creativity with this. But we did an exercise earlier where you were having a conversation with Jesus, of Jesus saying, what can I do for you? And we were expressing our worries and kind of hearing a response from Jesus. And this time we're going to do more of a physical, a walk in nature with Jesus, or sitting by your window and looking at the landscape. But what I want you to pay attention to is, if you were on a walk with Jesus, what would Jesus have you notice? What would Jesus point out to you? What would he say pay attention to? I imagine that Jesus would want you to see everything through the eyes of awe and wonder. That's how I read his stories of seeing other human beings, is he really looked at everybody with awe and wonder and worthiness. And so I think he might influence you and I in that way. And then he would probably have a parable for you because Jesus used nature in his parables. And so maybe there's a parable that you haven't thought about before that you might experience in a new way on your walk. So I really want you to try that. I know some of this stuff sounds goofy. The mystics sound goofy to a lot of people, but what I think is they're here to offer us this beautiful experience that transforms our faith, in my opinion, and gives us that idea of a faith we can count on, like we talked last week. You'll also read a practice that I'm going to give you a book excerpt of somebody that wrote about how tending their garden is a spiritual experience. And many of you already do this. I know this is already a spiritual practice of yours. If it's not, I invite you to experiment with it. And I know in most of our climates, we're starting to be able to plant flowers and work in our yards and be outside again. And so this spring, I really want you to kind of look at all of that as a spiritual practice more than you ever have before. And think about, as you touch the soil, the life-giving soil, and as you give your plants water or the rain falls, really think about that as a metaphor for spirituality and how we feed our own souls, how we water our thirst. There's a chapter of Ezekiel that's about dry bones, and sometimes I use that. If you've been in classes with me before, we've looked at that as our spiritual kind of dryness and drought, and when we just don't feel like we can do it. And the breath is named like 11 times in that scripture of dry bones. It's about Israel's loss of hope, but I think it also applies to humans. And breath is significant to restoring our spiritual lives. And so look, when I was writing my notes for today, I noticed that soil and soul have one letter difference. And I thought that was kind of cool. So I was just kind of writing it and happened to line up on my page of soil and soul. And so maybe think about that as you're planting flowers and working in your yard, of what could the soil teach me, or how could I feel a soulful connection to nature in a new way? And really the life-giving sense of all of those experiences. And I think that plants really mimic our own growth, right? They're growing towards God. They're literally growing towards the sun. And most of us imagine God kind of above us. And we are too, right? We're growing towards God. And I think we're each, I see beauty when I look at your beautiful faces on this screen. I see beauty in all of you, and I see growth, and I see a contribution to the earth. And so I hope that you can not only see yourself that way, but see every other woman and man and human being that way. So look at nature in that aspect. This week, you're going to read Bernard from Clairvaux. Oh, wait, I want to see this Chris quote. It's when we notice the dirt that God is most present in us. It's the very sign of his presence. C.S. Lewis. Chris, thank you so much for sharing that. I love C.S. Lewis. He's such a Christian writer. It's such, I mean, not he was a fiction writer, right? We have amazing works of literature from C.S. Lewis, but his faith commentaries within his literature are profound and amazing. Yeah, there's a hummingbirds. Oh, yeah, hummingbirds. Exactly. So tiny. I love this, Sandra. So strong, so colorful. Yeah, there's really a miracle of how a hummingbird flies. Sitting on the porch with Jesus in nature. Yeah, soil and soul, Kara. Yeah, Sarah, Kara, you would totally get that, Kara. You probably already feel that in your soul. But yeah, that I love that too. Okay, so Bernard of Clairvaux and Francis of Assisi. They are our two mystics for this week, and they both lived in the 1100s. So let me put up my timeline, because then I just like to give you context of where we are on this journey. So so Bernard of Clairvaux and Francis of Assisi are in this circle. This is what we're reading right now. And you'll see every week I put who you've read on this timeline, so you can kind of get a feel for where are they in the big picture of things, and what would life have been like when they were writing. I think that's always important when we're reading historical writers, of like, what would their perspective be? So they were writing before, what did we have? Before buttons on clothing, before paper money, before we had eyeglasses and clocks and windmills. That's pretty amazing to think about. So when you read their writing, life probably was a whole lot simpler in the sense of all the inventions and material things we have now. And so tune into that in our writing, because they write about simplifying your life. So that meant don't have buttons on your clothing, right? So that's always an interesting thing to think about in context, I think. Let's see. Okay, so I want to start with Bernard of Clairvaux, because he was born first. So he was born in 1090. So just to kind of let you know, we're just into the 1000s with these writers. The word Clairvaux is French. Bernard was from France. And so he was named for the town that he grew up in. And Clairvaux means clear valley. And it's referred to as the Valley of Light often. But Clear Valley, I thought, was so interesting. I'm going to show you some pictures of the reduction in pollution due to the shelter in place. And I think about that with Clairvaux and Clear Valley, and that's a pretty cool thing. We're actually seeing the valleys again in large cities, and I'm going to show you a picture of the Himalayas in India that are now visible. The interesting thing with Bernard was he was a high intellect. He was from a wealthy family. He was in the elite of society. And he became a spiritual director to popes at the time, to kings, to French noblemen. He was kind of among the rich and the famous. So he would have been like the priest to the noble, wealthy families at the time. And so it's interesting because the other mystics we've studied often were poor and had adversity in their lives and had struggle. And so Bernard's story is very different than that. And the way he used his calling, he felt a calling to devote his life to contemplation and silence and monastic practices. But he used his network and his resources to teach and spread more gospel, if you will. But it was like his form of evangelizing was using his wealth and resources. And so it's a very interesting story as a mystical person. And I thought maybe some of you might relate, because we are in the privilege, and we are, our lives are pretty cushy when you think about it. And so you don't have to have this real struggle in life to feel the presence of God. I think sometimes we feel guilty for the resources we've been given. And I think Bernard of Clairvaux kind of says, this isn't about what you have or don't have. This is about how you use it and how you teach of the love of God given what you have. And so I think you'll find his readings interesting. He saw God, though, radically at the time, because he was saying God is love and only love. And he wrote about these 4 degrees of love, and I'll share a summary of that with you. But that would not have been well received at the time, because the wrath of God and putting fear into people and reminding people they're sinful and broken, that would have been kind of the message of the medieval church. And so he wasn't taken seriously. He was persecuted at the time, but he remained respected because of wealth and power. So it's kind of interesting that had he been a commoner, he probably would have been martyred, killed, put in prison. But because he was connected, he kind of could stay in his ministry. So it's always interesting to me how God uses us no matter what our circumstance is. But he wrote over 100 sermons on the biblical book, the Song of Songs. And that book, when I was in seminary, Song of Songs, some of you in your Bibles, it's called the Song of Solomon. And it's like around Ecclesiastes, Isaiah. It's kind of this, it's just a few pages. So it's one to easily flip by. But it's after Psalms and Proverbs. So kind of in that middle section of your Bible. The Song of Songs is 5 poems about love. And it is, or no, it's more than that. It's 8 poems about love. And for some reason, Bernard, that was his favorite book of the Bible. And what he saw was this beautiful marriage to God symbolism in the Song of Songs. But what I was going to say is in seminary, people kind of roll their eyes at this book, right? Like it's not academic. It's not biblical scholars don't give it a lot of merit. It's a little bit of like Proverbs. Proverbs is a book of the Bible that academics don't give a lot of merit to. And so Song of Songs gets skipped over a lot in sermons, in anybody that's been seminary trained might have gotten a little bit of a bias against it because it's just a lot of fluffy poetry is the way it's described. But when I found that Bernard had over 100 sermons on this, I thought, this is something to pay attention to. Why did he like it so much? And so I have assigned for your reading this week, one of the poems from Song of Songs, and the editors in the Bible called it Springtime Rhapsody. And so it's the second half of chapter 2 in Song of Songs or Solomon, if you have your Bibles with you right now. But it's just this beautiful poem about the birth of spring, and it's the love of God in nature and how God loves us. So what Bernard saw in the Song of Songs was a love poem about God's love for us and our love for God, as if we were a man and woman falling in love. And I think that's why academics kind of roll their eyes. But it's like Romeo and Juliet at the time, right, of the Bible. It's the Romeo and Juliet of the Bible. But Bernard saw it as a story of spiritual devotion. And so I want you to read it as that and just see how is God loving us through nature? How does God give us signs of love through nature, signs of hope through nature, and just kind of explore it in that sense, if you will. Okay, so let me catch up a second. I love that we're using the chat. Yeah. Oh, Michelle, I love this. Michelle just sent me a note. Soil and soul, the significance of one letter is I and you. I like that even more. That's so cool. You're right. I and you in soil and soul. Oh my gosh, we've got something here, girls. We may have to do a sermon on this. Okay, and then yeah, I love this. Listening to you. Okay, you got it too, Deborah. I love that. Okay. And Patricia, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I got to interview Patricia for one of the What Matters podcasts. It was so cool to talk with her. She's amazing. And Rhonda, yeah. What is more important than love? Exactly. Walking with my soul. Oh, you guys are such soulful people. I love this. So Bernard wrote about these 4 degrees of love, and this could be a whole class on itself. As I was working through it last night, I was like, this is yet another thing that we could dive deeper into. There's so many. We are going to be in classes for days after this. So the 4 degrees of love, the first degree is basically a selfish love. This is, I love myself and I'm out for myself, and I don't don't get all this stuff that we're talking about, right? I just am in my ego, self-absorbed, selfish. Bernard kind of recognizes that as that's kind of childish love, or that's where we begin with a journey towards God. And remember, a lot of the mystics have this journey towards God kind of writing, right? We read that in Thomas Keating's work with the levels of spiritual awareness. Who else did we read that in? I'm blanking. Somebody else was, well, the Cloud of Knowing. Oh, the Indwelling, Julian of Norwich. So you're moving toward God. You're moving toward recognizing an indwelling of God. And the second degree is to love God for the sake of oneself. And this one is a little bit selfish, a little bit bargaining, a little bit manipulative of like, if I'm a good person, good things will happen to me. If I love God, then I'll be rewarded. Okay, so Bernard calls us out a bit on that of like, what's your motive for loving God? Is it because life gets easier and better? If so, then that's not real love. And then the third one is to love God for God's sake. And that is genuinely love God for who God is, and not with a selfish intention or motivation. Your love for God is sincere and outpouring, and you're outpouring your heart to God. You're sharing your emotions with God. You get vulnerable with God. That's where I see most of you. I mean, we wouldn't be in this class if we weren't kind of in that third degree of love that Bernard talks about. And then the fourth degree of love is to love oneself for God's sake. This is where my self-compassion training just like is like fireworks going off in my brain. I get so excited about this stuff because this is the stage where you recognize you are made of love, and you are made in the image of God, and you are a miracle, and you are pure love. And no matter what has happened to you in your life, that loving soul is in there and is untouched and is connected to God. And so that's the bulk of my work with clients, is trying to understand this self-love, but in a deep, unconditional sense of self-compassion. And so the fourth degree of love that Bernard of Clairvaux writes about is because you love God, you can love yourself as a beautiful creation and everyone else too. And that's when we really get in this space. And I know many of you are living this way already, that you have that deep love for all human beings, including yourself. So that's Bernard's on loving God encapsulated, but the book is like, can you see my fingers like that thick? So someday we'll work through that one, but not right now. And Bernard has this famous line of, only by the warmth of my heart did I know God was there. Only by the warmth of my heart did I know God was there. And so remember, and this is kind of by design, but the way I designed this class was that we were introduced to heart breathing. We began to move into our hearts. We're getting a little more comfortable with embodying things. The prayer of Julian of Norwich, that embodied prayer, if you haven't looked at that, I think it's in April 9th's materials. It's literally like bringing love and God into your body through motions that Julian of Norwich taught. And this idea of warming your heart, we know John Wesley had an experience like this in London when he says, my heart was strangely warmed. That is kind of a nod to this work of Bernard of Clairvaux. Possibly John Wesley, who was in the 1700s, had studied Bernard of Clairvaux in the 1100s and was familiar with that phrase of that being the goal, that your heart gets strangely warmed when you feel the presence of God. So that's pretty cool stuff. And then here's one of my favorites, and why I picked Bernard for this week for you, is you will find his words, you will find much more among the woods than you ever will among books. Woods and stones will teach you what you can never hear from any master. I'll put that one out for you too, but you will hear much more among the woods than you ever would among books. Okay, we're moving from the intellect into the heart. We're moving out into nature, outside of the institution. Words and stones will teach you what you can never hear from any master. That's amazing. On that note of sharing these things with you, I sent out a class survey in an email. There's also a link on our web page. If you could, there's 4 questions, I think, and they're just open-ended. If you could share with me what you've learned or your favorite quotes, I'm going to compile those for like a takeaway for all of us for after the class, that you could have a kind of a quick reference of the class's favorite things that we discovered as we were going through this 6 weeks. So be sure and look for that survey and let me know what your favorite lines were. So you'll also read from Francis of Assisi this week. And you probably are familiar with Francis. I'm going to show you a picture that every garden statue in the garden store is often Francis of Assisi. So when you go to the garden store to buy your spring plants, you will always see this sculpture in some form of a fountain, and it's beautiful. I always love it. But Francis of Assisi is from Italy, and he is known as the patron saint of earth and animals. And he was the first one that did a blessing of the animals service in the 1100s. And I know some of our churches do that. I think all the Resurrection campuses have a version that they do of blessing of the animals. And so that came from Francis of Assisi. It originated with him, and he really saw creation. He saw God in all animals and in creation. So you're going to read his work this week too. And I think it's interesting to note that Pope Francis, our current Pope in Italy, he is the only Pope that took the name Francis as his Pope identifier. So you probably know this, but popes select a name when they're made Pope. And so he selected Francis in honor of Francis of Assisi, and nobody in human history has chosen Francis before. And it's interesting because Pope Francis very much echoes the teachings of Francis of Assisi, the care for the poor, the environmental issues, the kind of this loving approach. Pope Francis has really been an asset to the Catholic Church as they kind of remarket themselves, rebrand themselves. And it's really going back to more of the teachings of Francis of Assisi and these other mystics, which is pretty cool. If you haven't watched the movie Two Popes on Netflix, write that down as homework this week too. And if you don't have Netflix, borrow a login from somebody because it's really good. But the Linda McVeigh first sent it to me when it first was released on Netflix, and I watched it and absolutely loved this movie. It's about the transition from Pope Benedict to Pope Francis, so it's current day Pope story. But it's just amazing, and you just fall in love with Pope Francis when you watch this movie. I've watched it a couple times and have a whole list of quotes from it. So yes, some of you have read it. Oh, good. Or watched it, sorry. It's so good. But this idea, when you watch it now, think of Francis of Assisi and you'll see the teachings come through with Pope Francis. So one of Assisi's things was we're totally neglecting the poor in the medieval church institution. And Jesus was all about that message. And so he called out the church on having strayed from the teaching of Jesus. And Assisi was interesting too, because he grew up wealthy also, like Bernard. So this week we're kind of seeing the influence of wealth in the Christian mystic writings. He was expected to take over his father's silk merchant business, but he decided to go a different route, and he went into the military. And when he was in the military, I think he was age 20, and he was taken as a prisoner of war in a kind of a regional war of Antioch in Italy. And so Assisi was a prisoner of war and had grown up in wealth and now is extremely suffering. And he came out deathly ill. They released him because he was about to die. And so he had a long recovery, but in that time, he really saw it as a reset button on his life. And he found a relationship with God in that. And he came out of it very different. He finally understood suffering. And it's very similar to Buddha's story. If you've read the story of Buddha growing up wealthy and then seeing outside the city gates all the suffering of common man, and then feeling a call to experience God in the way that those people suffering experience God. Assisi has a very similar history. And so he became passionate about the poor and the suffering. And that's kind of what he wanted to pursue in a spiritual life. So he became a monk and he founded the Franciscan order. And now we have, the word Franciscan gets tossed around a lot, but that was Francis of Assisi's start. And he really recruited like 12 friends and recruited them into the monastic life, and then started their own order or monastery, if you will, to take care of the poor and to spend time in contemplation. But he used some of the words for the first time that we use today. St. Francis of Assisi was one of the first ones to use Mother Earth. He used Sister Moon and Brother Sun, and a lot of, when he would refer to nature, he made it part of our family. He used familial language to make Earth part of our family. That was a crazy new terminology at the time. That would have been so far from normal. And so something we take for granted today, like Mother Earth, he actually started. And this was a whole new way of thinking. And that's why the church kind of pushed back against him. He basically was the first recycling movement. St. Francis of Assisi was the first one to talk about reusing your things or turning trash into something else. His writings very much look like our social media posts today, which is just fascinating. But in his mind, we worship and glorify God by taking care of creation, right? That's how you worship and care for God. So I was thinking of that as I'm trying to save these squirrels that, Critter Getter could have come and taken care of for us. But I was like, no, they have souls. They're created by God. I have to save them, right? And so St. Francis of Assisi, as I was reading his stuff, I felt like, yeah, this is what St. Francis was preaching. So let's look at these images of how the earth has benefited from this time in shutdown. And I'm almost finished here, but these are images. I've got 4 of them for you. You may have seen these on your social media, but this is a view of the Himalayan mountains. I hope you can see it on your screens. I'm pointing as if we're in a room together, but the Himalayan mountains are visible now from India for one of the first times in decades. Some people can't remember the last time. Many people in their lifetime have not seen these mountains, and suddenly they are in view. But it's because of a reduction in pollution. Sea turtles, there's lots of great stories on sea turtles hatching in Florida beaches because the humans are gone. And these deer at a park in London. I think this might have been near Kensington Palace that's usually full of tourists because there's this walkway between the trees. So if you've been there, you might be able to imagine that scene. Now the deer can graze. And then this is a paved road, but the lions are sleeping on the warm pavement. So normally tourists and safari vehicles would be here trying to see the lions in the wilderness, and instead they're taking a warm nap. Isn't that awesome? I love these. You can find more of these if you Google images. But that is just, such a statement, I think, on how maybe there is a huge lesson here for us in caring for the earth and this time in crisis. I hope we are getting the message that Bernard and Francis of Assisi would have us get. So this week, I think you are going to enjoy spending a lot of time in nature and seeing God in everything, and try to use this as a tool to help you with worry, right? See the bigger picture, see the miracles that God can perform, see that life it does come back, and that things are in cycles, and we're in a downturn right now, but there will be a rebirth, there will be a coming back. Let nature kind of speak to you. Oh, Terry, pandas mated for the first time in captivity. Oh, because nobody's watching. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Okay, so I also want to give you some more practical tools. So the walking with Jesus is a beautiful mystical practice, and I hope you will really embrace that and allow Jesus to talk to you. I also want to give you some, and tending your garden, I want you to turn that into a spiritual practice. I also want to give you some things to help retrain that brain of yours, right? That neuroplasticity. And like we put our thoughts on the clouds and in the river and on the clothesline and on the snow globe, right? All of those tricks that we're training our brain, those are exercises for us to get stronger. Here's a couple more. So one of the practices that I love, and if you've been getting my emails, I think I did this one a year ago. I'll post it again, but it's this idea of living in awe and wonder. And the practice is just that you start incorporating the word wow into your vocabulary. So when you wake up in the morning, you might say, wow, I get to wake up today. Wow, I get to have a cup of tea today. Wow, I get to do this Bible study with all these amazing women today. Wow, I really slept well. Wow, I get to hear my children laugh today. Sorry, we still have a home phone. So, wow, look at the sky. Okay, wow, look at, let me get that, because that's just gonna keep going. Okay. Wow, I can't wait to have my morning coffee. That's usually my wow first thing in the morning. And then maybe while you're out, wow, look at the sky. Wow, look at that color of blue. Look at that color of green. Wow, look at the red buds. So you're just trying to incorporate the word wow as much as possible until you get sick of yourself saying it. And because about the time you get tired of the word wow is when the neuroplasticity is working, right? That means it's getting hardwired in there. And so just incorporate wow as much as you can. And even you could do this with your kids, like, wow, look at that painting you just did. Wow, that puzzle was amazing. And play with it. Wow, I love this dinner. Wow, I really enjoy cooking. So, wow, I get to do the dishwasher one more time. This is great. But play with it because your brain starts to absorb that spirit of wow. And that is the way of worshiping creation. That is the way of worshiping God. That is the way of, worshiping God by noticing creation. And wow, I'm grateful, right? Wow, I'm grateful I have this bed. I'm grateful that I have a house during this time. I'm grateful that I have a job. I'm grateful that we have family that are healthy. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so that's one practice. And the next one is a practice of, oh, I love this. Yes, help thinks wow from Anne Lamott. Exactly, Michelle. In one class we studied her, and that her prayer is help thanks wow. That's all you need to pray is Anne Lamott's teaching, but she has a book by that title that's so great. Yeah, you use the clients. Yes, the wonder of an inner child. Exactly. Perfect, Patricia. That's what we're getting at with the wow. And then the next one is a practice of arriving. And this one is the idea that we become present wherever we are. So as you all know, when our brains are worried, it's because they're just running with racing thoughts, right? And when we get overwhelmed, it's because our brains have just been racing and we're not present in this current moment. So one of the ways to get present is this practice called arrive, or I call it arrive, but you can give it a different name that resonates with you. But it's basically like when you sit down to do your Bible study, you take a minute to arrive. Okay, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to do my Bible study. I have a cup of tea. I have my Bible on my lap. You're just getting really mindful instead of just kind of blurring through the day from one activity to another. You're giving yourself a minute to arrive in that moment. And it's really about setting an intention. So Google does this, Google Corporate. And they have this, before team meetings, they do a minute to arrive. And so everyone at the board table or on Zoom now is supposed to kind of take a minute, take a deep breath. Okay, I'm here for this meeting. I'm at this desk. I'm in this moment. I'm paying attention. That's the process of arriving. And so a physician that I was teaching this to, one of my clients, she said she started doing this before she would go into the exam room. This was 6 months ago. And so she would stand at the door, she'd pick up the patient's chart and be ready to go in, but she would just take a breath and she would kind of say a prayer for the name on the chart. and take a breath and just say, help me, help her. And then she'd walk into the room. And so she did this just as a practice because we were working on overwhelm and self-compassion with her. But what it did for her, she noticed, is that she was more present with that patient because she had taken a moment to arrive in that moment to do that work that she was going to go do to help somebody else. And so I think when you become aware of this, it's really powerful. It's one of those tiny little nuance practices that kind of seems like it wouldn't make a difference, but this is one that can really make a big difference, especially for your level of worry. So the way that it would apply to worry is if you're doing a task around your house and your mind is starting to go to a news story you saw or the latest statistic, you just come back to, no, right now I'm just doing laundry. I'm right here doing laundry, folding these clothes. And you're kind of arriving back into that moment, right? I know I'm just loading the dishes. I'm not watching the news right now. I'm not worried about that right now. They are fine. I am fine. You're just coming back to the moment. So that's arriving. Play with that. And then the last one is soul stroll. And this is kind of part of your walk with Jesus exercise, but I want to also give you some, just when you're on a walk, you can make that a very mindful practice by noticing heel toe movement when you're on a walk. So put your heel down first and then your toe. And the more you just watch your step, heel, toe, heel, toe, heel, toe, you've become mindful. You're not thinking about your worry anymore. You're thinking about heels and toes, right? So it's just a way to interrupt that racing mind and train your brain. You can also inhale and exhale with, we've done this with our breathing, our word breaths, but I'm grateful to be alive. I'm taking a step forward. I'm moving forward. I'm moving out of my worry, right? You can do breath prayers as you're walking. You can also count steps. So every time your left foot hits the sidewalk, make that a count. And when you get to 10, you start over, right? And all you're doing is distracting your brain from the hamster wheel of thinking that it's doing, right? But the more you do this, the more your brain naturally quits worrying. So Thich Nhat Hanh is in, I think, Thailand. He may have passed away recently, but he has this quote: when we walk like we are rushing, we print anxiety and sorrow on the earth. We print anxiety and sorrow on the earth when we walk in a rush. We have to walk in a way that we only print peace and serenity on the earth. Be aware of the contact between your feet and the earth. Walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet. Oh, I'll post that for you guys, but walk as if you're kissing the earth with your feet. That is such a beautiful way to worship God today. So as we close, and once again, I was over 45 minutes. As we close, I want to leave you with the poet Rumi has 3 points. Close your eyes, fall in love, stay there. Close your eyes, fall in love, stay there. And I want you to apply that with God this week. Close your eyes, fall in love with God, and stay there as long as you can. And that's one of your practices for this week. And then I'm going to close us in a prayer from St. Francis of Assisi. It's a prayer that you've probably heard, but now it's kind of relevant and in context because we're learning about the life of St. Francis of Assisi. This is attributed to him. We don't know that he wrote it, but it's beautiful and it's totally in line with his teachings. So if you will, take a deep breath with me. Oh, I love these comments. Good. I hope you're reading. Read the comments from one another because some of these tips are awesome. And as Michelle said, we will capture those. If you have questions, please put them in the chat as well. And I will try to follow up. And we'll close with this prayer of Assisi, and then Michelle will put you in your breakout groups. And today I want you to just share, where do you see God in nature? And just share with one another how you experience God when you are in nature, and try to keep it into that context of in nature, how does God speak to you, or how do you see God at work or feel God's presence, okay? All right, take a deep breath, if you will, and close your eyes. And just join me in this time of prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. I'll post that for you as well. That's a great one to memorize and just carry with you in your heart. Okay, thank you all for joining today. I love you all so dearly, and I'm counting the days until we all can be in person again.